What if everything a community owns, believes, and lives for began not on earth, but in the sky? Among the Maasai of East Africa, cattle are not simply animals, they are life itself. But where did this deep bond come from, and why do the Maasai believe cattle were never meant for everyone? Long before borders, modern economies, and written history, the Maasai tell a story that begins with God Enkai and a rope stretching from heaven to earth. In this story, cattle once lived in the sky, guarded by the divine. Humanity struggled below, hungry and vulnerable, until Enkai looked down with compassion and decided to act. What followed was not just a gift, but a moment that would define identity, faith, and survival for generations. As cattle descended slowly from the sky, joy filled the earth. But not everyone watched in wonder. Some watched with envy, others with curiosity, and one single human action, small, impulsive, and irreversible, changed the destiny of the world forever. The rope was cut. Heaven and earth were separated. Abundance turned into scarcity, and divine closeness became distant memory. Why were the Maasai chosen? What did the cutting of the rope truly mean? And how does a single ancient story continue to shape attitudes toward wealth, land, morality, and God today? This is not just a folktale. It is a spiritual explanation for suffering, a moral warning against greed, and a cultural foundation that still guides decisions in a modern world facing climate change, land loss, and identity struggles. To understand the Maasai, one must first understand this story, because within it lies the answer to who they are, what they value, and why cattle are sacred. The rope may be gone, but its meaning still holds. The origin of cattle, a Maasai folktale. Chapter 1. Introduction and cultural background. Among the Maasai people of East Africa, folktales are not merely stories told for entertainment, they are living vessels of history, belief, morality, and identity. I understand folktales as a powerful way through which a community explains its origins, preserves its values, and guides the behavior of its members across generations. One of the most important and widely known Maasai folktales is The Origin of Cattle, a narrative that explains how cattle came into the possession of the Maasai through a divine gift from God, known as Enkai or Engai. This folktale occupies a central place in Maasai culture because cattle are the foundation of Maasai life, economy, spirituality, and social organization. The Maasai are a Nilotic pastoralist community found mainly in Kenya and northern Tanzania. Historically, their survival has depended almost entirely on livestock, especially cattle. From my understanding of Maasai culture, cattle are not viewed simply as animals for economic gain, but as living symbols of life itself. Cattle provide food in the form of milk, blood, and meat, and they also serve as a measure of wealth, a medium of exchange for bride price, and a symbol of social status. Every major life event among the Maasai is connected to cattle in one way or another, from birth and initiation to marriage and death. Because of this deep dependence, the Maasai worldview places cattle at the center of existence. The folktale of The Origin of Cattle explains not only where cattle came from, but also why the Maasai believe they have a sacred responsibility to care for them. I see this story as an explanation of identity. It answers the question of who the Maasai are by explaining what they were given by God and why their way of life is different from that of other communities. In traditional societies, such stories are essential because they provide meaning and order in the world. In traditional Maasai society, stories such as this one were passed down orally by elders, usually around evening fires, during communal ceremonies, or at moments of rest after daily work. These storytelling sessions were not casual activities, they were structured learning moments. Elders used stories to teach young people about bravery, obedience, humility, respect for God, and responsibility toward the community. I understand storytelling as a form of education long before formal schools existed. Through repetition, symbolism, and emotional engagement, important lessons were deeply embedded in the minds of listeners. The story of The Origin of Cattle also reflects the Maasai understanding of God. Enkai is seen as both male and female, distant yet close, powerful yet compassionate. By presenting cattle as a direct gift from Enkai, the folktale emphasizes divine care and concern for human survival. This reinforces faith and trust in God, especially during times of drought, famine, or disease. I find this aspect important because it shows how spirituality is woven into everyday life rather than separated from it. Another important element of this folktale is its role in shaping attitudes toward nature. Since cattle come from God, land, water, and pasture are also treated with respect. Overgrazing, wastefulness, and cruelty to animals are discouraged because they are seen as disrespecting a divine gift. In this way, the folktale promotes environmental awareness and sustainable living long before modern concepts of conservation were introduced. This essay is organized into 6 chapters, each exploring a different dimension of the folktale of the origin of cattle. Chapter 1 provides the cultural and historical background necessary to understand the story. Chapter 2 focuses on the narrative structure and content of the folktale itself. Chapter 3 examines its spiritual and religious significance. Chapter 4 analyzes the social and economic implications of the story. Chapter 5 discusses the moral lessons and values communicated through the folktale. Finally, Chapter 6 reflects on the contemporary relevance of the story and offers a conclusion. Chapter 2, the narrative of the folktale. The folktale of the origin of cattle begins in a distant past, a time when the world was still forming and the relationship between God, humans, and nature was direct and intimate. From my understanding of Maasai oral tradition, this period is described as an age of closeness, where Enkai, the supreme god, actively intervened in human life. The story opens with Enkai as the creator of the sky, the earth, humans, animals, and all elements that sustain life. Nothing existed outside Enkai's authority, and all resources were believed to come directly from divine will. In the beginning, cattle did not live on the earth as they do today. Instead, they were kept by Enkai in the sky. This detail is very significant within the narrative. I interpret this as a way of emphasizing the sacred nature of cattle. By placing cattle in the sky, the folktale establishes them as divine beings rather than ordinary animals. The sky represents holiness, purity, and closeness to God, while the earth represents human struggle and survival. The separation of cattle from humans at the start of the story highlights the idea that cattle were never meant to be taken for granted. According to the folktale, Enkai looked down upon the earth and observed the Maasai people living in hardship. They struggled to find food, shelter, and stability. Unlike other communities who relied on hunting or farming, the Maasai were vulnerable and dependent on divine provision. I understand this part of the story as a reflection of human suffering and God's compassion. Enkai is portrayed as a caring and responsive deity who does not ignore the cries of the people. Moved by compassion, Enkai decided to give the Maasai cattle so that they could sustain themselves and live with dignity. To deliver this divine gift, Enkai lowered cattle from the sky to the earth using a long rope, sometimes described as a leather strap or hide. One by one, the cattle descended from the heavens to the ground. This image is central to the folktale and carries deep symbolic meaning. The rope represents a direct connection between heaven and earth, between God and humanity. It shows that blessings come from above and that survival is dependent on divine generosity. As the cattle reached the earth, the Maasai received them with great joy and gratitude. In some versions of the folktale, the Maasai are instructed by Enkai on how to care for the cattle, what to eat, and how to live peacefully. This part of the narrative emphasizes obedience and responsibility. The cattle were not given for selfish use but for communal survival. I see this as an early lesson on stewardship and ethical living. However, the story takes a dramatic turn when other communities notice the cattle descending from the sky. Out of jealousy, curiosity, or misunderstanding, they attempt to interfere with the divine process. In many versions of the folktale, someone from another community cuts the rope connecting the sky and the earth. As a result, the flow of cattle is stopped, and only those that had already reached the earth remain with the Maasai. The rest stay in the sky with Enkai. This interruption is a crucial moment in the narrative. It explains why cattle are limited and why scarcity exists in the world. I interpret this event as a moral lesson about human interference with divine plans. The cutting of the rope symbolizes disobedience, envy, and lack of respect for sacred processes. It also introduces the idea that human actions can disrupt harmony and lead to lasting consequences. After the rope is cut, Enkai withdraws the direct connection between heaven and earth. Humans must now live by faith, prayer, and obedience rather than constant divine intervention. The Maasai are left with the cattle they have received, along with the responsibility to care for them and live according to Enkai's laws. This moment marks a transition from a world of abundance to one of responsibility and limitation. The narrative ends with a clear message: cattle are a sacred trust given by God, and the Maasai are chosen caretakers of this gift. The simplicity of the story makes it easy to remember, while its symbolism gives it lasting depth. Through repetition across generations, the narrative becomes a shared memory that unites the community. In conclusion, the narrative of the origin of cattle is carefully structured to explain divine generosity, human responsibility, and the consequences of disobedience. By examining the story itself, I gain a deeper understanding of how the Maasai explain their relationship with God, cattle, and the wider world. This narrative forms the foundation upon which the spiritual, social, and moral interpretations of the folktale are built. Chapter 3: Spiritual and Religious Significance. The folktale of the origin of cattle holds profound spiritual and religious significance within Maasai society. From my understanding, this story is not simply an explanation of how cattle came into existence among the Maasai, but a theological narrative that defines their relationship with God, nature, and life itself. At the center of this spiritual worldview is Enkai, also called Engai, the supreme deity who is believed to be the creator and sustainer of all things. Enkai is understood as a complex and all-encompassing god. In Maasai belief, Enkai possesses both masculine and feminine qualities, representing balance, completeness, and harmony. This understanding of God is reflected in the folktale, where Enkai is portrayed as powerful yet compassionate. I see Enkai's decision to give cattle to the Maasai as an act of divine mercy, showing concern for human suffering and survival. This reinforces the belief that God is not distant, but deeply involved in human affairs. By placing the origin of cattle in the spiritual realm, the folktale elevates cattle to a sacred status. Cattle are not seen merely as property or economic assets, but as blessings entrusted to humans by God. This belief shapes how the Maasai relate to their livestock. Acts such as slaughtering a cow are often accompanied by rituals, prayers, and expressions of gratitude. From my perspective, this demonstrates how spirituality governs daily activities, ensuring that economic practices remain morally and religiously grounded. The image of cattle descending from the sky through a rope is one of the most powerful spiritual symbols in the folktale. The sky represents the dwelling place of Enkai, while the earth represents the human world. The rope symbolizes a sacred connection between the divine and human realms. I interpret this as a reminder that all blessings originate from God and that human survival depends on maintaining harmony with the divine order. The cutting of the rope, which appears in many versions of the story, carries deep spiritual meaning. It represents the breaking of direct communion between God and humanity due to disobedience, envy, or lack of respect for sacred processes. This moment in the folktale explains why humans no longer experience constant divine provision and why prayer, sacrifice, and obedience become necessary. In this sense, the story functions similarly to other religious narratives that explain the origin of suffering and distance between God and humans. Prayer occupies an important place in Maasai religious life, and the folktale reinforces its importance. Since cattle come from Enkai, their well-being is closely linked to spiritual obedience. During times of drought, disease, or loss of livestock, elders lead communal prayers and rituals, asking Enkai for forgiveness, rain, and restoration. I understand this practice as a continuation of the belief that cattle remain under divine authority, even after being given to humans. Rain is another important spiritual element connected to cattle in Maasai belief. Enkai is often associated with rain, which sustains pasture and livestock. The folktale indirectly explains why rain is seen as a blessing rather than a natural occurrence. When rain fails, it is interpreted as a spiritual issue requiring reflection and reconciliation with God. This belief system encourages moral accountability and communal responsibility. The folktale also shapes the role of religious leaders within Maasai society. Elders, prophets, and ritual specialists are believed to have a closer relationship with Enkai and are entrusted with leading prayers and sacrifices. Their authority is legitimized by the belief that God directly intervenes in human affairs, as shown in the origin of cattle story. I see this as a way in which spirituality supports social order and leadership. Another significant spiritual lesson from the folktale is humility. Since cattle are a gift from God, humans must acknowledge their dependence on divine grace. Pride, greed, and disrespect toward God are believed to bring misfortune. This belief encourages a humble attitude toward wealth and success. Even a person with many cattle is reminded that abundance comes from Enkai, not personal effort alone. Chapter 4: Social and Economic Implications. The folktale of the origin of cattle has far-reaching social and economic implications for Maasai society. From my understanding, this story does not only explain where cattle came from, but also provides a framework for organizing social relationships, economic activities, and communal responsibilities. Because cattle are believed to be a divine gift from Enkai, their role in society is elevated beyond ordinary material wealth. Economically, cattle form the backbone of the traditional Maasai livelihood. The folktale legitimizes pastoralism as the rightful and divinely ordained way of life for the Maasai people. Herding cattle is not seen as an occupation chosen out of convenience, but as a calling entrusted to the community by God. I understand this belief as a powerful factor that has shaped Maasai economic behavior for generations, influencing migration patterns, grazing systems, and resource management. Cattle provide the primary sources of food in Maasai society, particularly milk and blood, which are consumed either separately or mixed together. Meat is eaten less frequently and usually during ceremonies or special occasions. The folktale reinforces moderation and balance in consumption, since cattle are sacred and should not be slaughtered carelessly. This belief system promotes sustainability and ensures that livestock herds are preserved for future generations. Socially, cattle play a central role in defining relationships and social status. Wealth among the Maasai is traditionally measured by the number of cattle one owns. However, this wealth is not meant to promote individualism or selfish accumulation. From my perspective, the folktale encourages communal responsibility. Those with many cattle are expected to assist relatives and neighbors during times of hardship. Generosity is therefore seen as a moral obligation rather than a personal choice. Marriage is one of the most important social institutions influenced by the centrality of cattle. Bride price, paid in cattle, symbolizes respect for the bride's family and recognition of the value of life and continuity. The folktale of the origin of cattle gives spiritual meaning to this practice. Since cattle come from Enkai, their exchange during marriage represents the sharing of divine blessings between families. I see this as a way in which economic practices are infused with spiritual and social significance. Cattle also influence age-set systems and leadership structures within Maasai society. Elders, who are custodians of tradition and spiritual knowledge, often control large herds of cattle. Their economic status reinforces their authority and responsibility in decision-making. The folktale supports this structure by emphasizing wisdom, stewardship, and accountability over mere possession. Land use and mobility are also shaped by the belief that cattle are a sacred trust. The Maasai traditionally practice seasonal migration to ensure access to pasture and water. This movement is guided by respect for nature and communal agreements rather than individual ownership of land. I understand this as an early form of environmental management rooted in spiritual values rather than legal systems. Conflicts over cattle, though present, are regulated by customs and moral teachings derived from folktales. Stealing cattle is considered a serious offense because it violates both social harmony and divine trust. The origin of cattle story reinforces honesty and respect for communal property, helping to maintain social order. In contemporary times, modernization, land subdivision, and changing economic systems have challenged traditional Maasai pastoralism. However, the folktale of the origin of cattle continues to influence attitudes toward wealth and social responsibility. Even when Maasai individuals engage in alternative livelihoods, cattle often remain symbols of identity and cultural pride. In conclusion, the social and economic implications of the folktale of the origin of cattle are profound. The story shapes how wealth is defined, how relationships are formed, and how resources are managed. Through this folktale, I see how economic activities are guided by spiritual values, ensuring that material survival is balanced with social cohesion and moral responsibility. Chapter 5: Moral Lessons and Values. The folktale of the origin of cattle serves as a powerful moral guide within Maasai society. From my understanding, this story is not only meant to explain how cattle came into the world, but also to shape character, behavior, and ethical relationships among individuals and within the community. Through symbolism and narrative simplicity, the folktale communicates deep moral values that are expected to guide everyday life. One of the most important moral lessons conveyed by the folktale is gratitude. Since cattle are believed to be a direct gift from Enkai, the Maasai are taught to receive them with thankfulness and humility. I understand gratitude in this context as more than verbal appreciation. It is expressed through respectful treatment of cattle, careful use of resources, and acknowledgement of divine provision. Ingratitude, on the other hand, is believed to invite misfortune and suffering. Closely connected to gratitude is the value of humility. The folktale reminds the Maasai that no matter how many cattle one owns, wealth ultimately comes from God. Pride and arrogance are discouraged because they reflect forgetfulness of the divine source of blessings. I see this moral teaching as a way of preventing social divisions and envy within the community. Humility helps maintain harmony and mutual respect among community members. Obedience is another key moral lesson emphasized in the folktale. The moment when the rope connecting the sky and the earth is cut serves as a warning about the consequences of disobedience and interference with divine plans. This event teaches respect for boundaries, rules, and authority. From my perspective, this lesson extends beyond spiritual obedience to include respect for elders, customs, and communal decisions. The folktale also promotes the value of stewardship. Cattle are not owned in an absolute sense, they are entrusted to humans for care and protection. This belief encourages responsible management of livestock and discourages wastefulness and cruelty. I understand stewardship as a moral obligation that connects humans to both God and nature. It teaches that resources must be preserved for future generations. Another important moral value expressed in the folktale is generosity. Since cattle are a divine gift, they are meant to support the entire community rather than enrich individuals alone. Those who have many cattle are expected to share with relatives, neighbors, and the needy, especially during times of drought or famine. This value strengthens social bonds and promotes collective survival. The story also addresses the dangers of greed and jealousy. The cutting of the rope by other communities symbolizes how envy can destroy opportunities for abundance and harmony. I interpret this as a warning against selfish desires that disrupt communal peace. Greed is portrayed not only as a personal flaw but as a social danger that affects everyone. Respect for life is another moral lesson embedded in the folktale. Because cattle are sacred, life is treated with reverence. Slaughtering an animal is done with care, ritual, and purpose, reminding people of the seriousness of taking life. This moral teaching fosters compassion and ethical awareness in human actions. The folktale further emphasizes patience and acceptance. After the rope is cut, humans must live with limitation and uncertainty. Instead of rebellion, the Maasai are taught to accept life's challenges with faith and resilience. I understand this lesson as a way of cultivating emotional strength and endurance in the face of hardship. Chapter 6: Contemporary Relevance and Conclusion. The folktale of the origin of cattle continues to hold great relevance in contemporary Maasai society despite rapid social, economic, and cultural changes. From my understanding, this story remains a powerful source of identity, guiding values and attitudes even as the Maasai engage with modernization, formal education, urbanization, and global economic systems. While lifestyles may change, the meaning attached to cattle and their divine origin continues to influence how the Maasai understand themselves and their place in the world. One of the major contemporary challenges facing the Maasai is land loss and land subdivision. Traditional grazing lands have been reduced due to population growth, privatization, wildlife conservation policies, and agricultural expansion. In this context, the folktale of the origin of cattle reinforces the belief that land and pasture are sacred trusts connected to divine provision. I understand this belief as a moral argument for protecting communal land and resisting practices that threaten pastoral livelihoods. Climate change has also increased the frequency of droughts, directly affecting cattle survival. In times of environmental crisis, the folktale reminds the Maasai of the importance of prayer, unity, and responsible stewardship. Rather than viewing drought solely as a scientific phenomenon, many Maasai interpret it as a call for reflection, moral renewal, and reconciliation with God. This perspective strengthens communal resilience and emotional coping mechanisms. Education and modernization have introduced new economic opportunities, leading some Maasai to adopt alternative livelihoods such as farming, business, and formal employment. Despite this shift, cattle remain symbols of cultural pride and continuity. I observe that even educated Maasai often invest in livestock as a way of maintaining a connection to their heritage. The folktale provides a cultural anchor that prevents total disconnection from traditional values. The story also has relevance in discussions of environmental conservation. Modern conservation efforts often emphasize sustainability, balance, and respect for ecosystems, values that are deeply embedded in the folktale. The belief that cattle are a divine gift encourages responsible grazing, protection of water sources, and ethical treatment of animals. I see this as evidence that indigenous knowledge systems can contribute meaningfully to modern environmental debates. In contemporary social life, the folktale continues to influence ceremonies, rituals, and moral education. Elders still recount the story to younger generations as a way of teaching respect, responsibility, and identity. Although storytelling methods may evolve, the core message remains unchanged. This continuity demonstrates the enduring power of oral tradition. From a broader perspective, the folktale of the origin of cattle offers universal lessons applicable beyond Maasai society. Themes of gratitude, stewardship, humility, and respect for nature resonate with global concerns about environmental degradation, inequality, and moral responsibility. I believe that engaging with such indigenous narratives encourages cultural appreciation and ethical reflection across societies. As I reflect on the entire folktale, I recognize it as a holistic framework that integrates spirituality, economy, morality, and social organization. Each chapter of this essay has shown how a single story can shape belief systems and guide behavior across generations. The origin of cattle folktale explains not only the past but also informs present choices and future aspirations. In conclusion, the folktale of the origin of cattle is far more than a traditional myth. It is a living narrative that continues to shape Maasai identity and worldview. Through its explanation of divine generosity, human responsibility, and moral order, the story offers wisdom that remains relevant in a changing world. By preserving and studying this folktale, I affirm the value of indigenous knowledge and the enduring role of storytelling in sustaining cultural heritage.